Today on episode 20 of the Play Guitar podcast, we're talking blues guitar. Once you get the blues under your belt, it can help you in so many different ways. Also, we've got some listener feedback, so stay tuned. Welcome to episode 20 of the Play Guitar podcast. I'm Lee, and this is the podcast that's determined to make you a better guitar player. No matter if you're just starting out, if you've been playing for years, this is the show that'll help you become the guitarist that you always wanted to be. On today's episode, well, ladies and gentlemen, I made it. Episode number 20. I think this is the first milestone in my mind, that I set for myself to get to 20. It's been so much fun, and I have so much cool stuff planned. But I wanted to really just focus on this show up to this point and get used to trying to bring just really valuable content to you each week. I'm getting more and more excited about the show and all of the next steps I have planned. But today, I want to celebrate. And how do you celebrate? With gifts, of course, right? I have a gift for you, and I've been very fortunate to be able to message with and hang out with some of you, and it's really been fun. I love talking guitar, as you can tell. For me, there's always something to talk about, whether it's about gear or playing or recording or talking about great guitar players. For me, it's endless, it's a good thing because I have a podcast about it. But I've enjoyed every second of talking guitar with all of you, and the suggestions that I've gotten for you have steered the show in some new, very cool directions. I noticed though that a lot of time we start talking about, like soloing and specifically blues soloing. And a lot of time it's about how to get it to sound right, how to really outline the chords and get past that initial stage of just using the blues box. So here's what I did. Yesterday morning, I got up, I fired up the camera, and I got to work. I created a video lesson, and I have that for you, and it's called Get Your Blues Soloing Under Control. It turned out great, really. I think it's great. And I'm so excited to make it available to you. So to celebrate my first milestone, my 20th episode, I'm going to make this available to you. So here's what you do. Just go to www.freeblueslesson.com to get this, it's a cool video lesson. What it does is it takes you through the 6 steps that I found that will give you the foundations for playing killer blues solos. So I wanted to give it its own URL that's easy to remember. Sometimes, when you're listening in the car, you don't have a pen or something like that. So it's freeblueslesson.com. Now, I'll take you right over to there. I'm just starting to get into video lessons. I'm working on, I've got on my camera and my lights and all this stuff you have to have. It's a lot harder than doing a podcast. You got to get, clothes and write and everything. But anyway, I wanted to get this giveaway done first to make it available to all of you who found the podcast first. So thank you again for celebrating with me today. And in keeping with the theme of the Get Your Blues Soloing Under Control, I'm going to have today's show it's going to get into the blues today. The blues has been an important part of my guitar playing, and it's something I really enjoy playing and teaching. But not everyone is familiar with the progressions and the patterns associated with the blues. And that could be a really big reason why you may not be moving forward on the guitar the way you might want. It might be that missing piece. So we're going to go ahead and get into it today. So let's go ahead and get started with the main topic for today. understanding blues guitar. Today I'd like to share one of the biggest breakthroughs in my playing. This breakthrough happened as a result of a time in my playing where I focused solely on playing the blues. I didn't start out listening to the blues or even really liking the blues the way I do now. But when I finally did spend some time figuring out how blues progressions and blues soloing worked, I saw the biggest increase in my understanding of the guitar. And this is by far. So you say, why? Why the blues? It's not really that popular anymore. And most of the greats, they aren't even with us anymore. And supposedly the blues sound sad all the time. Why would I play the blues? Well, if those statements sound familiar to you, then this show is definitely for you. There are so many misconceptions. That's not easy to say. Misconceptions about playing the blues. There have been, you've got comedy sketches that usually show an old man. He's playing an out-of-tune guitar. He's making up silly lyrics off the top of his head. But this is not the style of music that I've come to know. And this is not the type of musician that I've found that makes a career out of playing the blues. Let me tell you what I've discovered, learning about and playing the blues. The blues is raw. It's an honest music, and it's incredibly fun to play. And the blues can also sound absolutely devastating. It can be awesome. But I'm only talking about the music. The blues, like any style of music, it lyrically spans the whole spectrum of topics. You on one side, you've got some uplifting gospel blues, and then you go all the way to the other side, right down to the dark stuff. And you've got everything in between. But I'm not getting into the subject matter about the songs today. What I want to focus on today is the music, the song structure, the chords, the scales, the tones, understanding these things and making them our own. That's what can take our playing to a new level. So the question is still on the table. Why play the blues? Well, why? Why would guitar players in 2018 want to spend a good bit of their precious time learning about how the blues works? So let me flip that question around. What would happen if you didn't understand how the blues works, how it was played? Well, if you didn't have a basic understanding of how it works, you would be at an extreme disadvantage. You would have no understanding of the foundation of modern music. The chord structure of the 12-bar blues and the relationship between the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord, the use of the pentatonic scale in solos, riffs, and vocal melodies, they're all woven into the music of our time. Rock music, country music, southern rock, funk, jazz, soul, pop, on and on and on. There are elements of the blues all throughout these styles. And when you can recognize the elements of the blues in these different styles of music, you can start to take advantage of them. You can start to incorporate some of your blues playing in these other styles of music to bring you a very powerful and honest approach to a song that, can sound very bread and butter. It could be kind of plain. So when I started playing, I was really into rock guitar, and that was all I wanted to play. I learned as much as I could, and I started playing out in rock bands, and that was after a few years I've been playing, and I was loving life. I really enjoyed playing. In high school, though, I had the opportunity to play in the school jazz band, and that opened up my ears to new sounds and a whole new style of playing. And I began to enjoy learning this, and I kept at it. I would play jazz at school, and then I would play rock in bands outside of school. And that's the way I kept it for several years. And the things I learned to play in rock were over here, and the things that I learned to play in jazz were over here, and that's where they stayed. I considered them completely separate, and that was fine. It was like I was two different guitar players. When I eventually continued on with music and attended, I went to University of the Arts, and I started to really get into the workings of jazz guitar. The standard way that you learn the jazz education starts is with a chord progression called the 2-5-1. The 2-5-1 is a common chord progression in jazz, and we focused on it and we played over this progression over and over and over again. We used it in different keys, and I learned it, but it never really sat well for me. It just wasn't the sound that made me want to go grab my guitar and start playing. All of that changed with the next type of jazz chord progression that I learned. The next one we focused on after spending all that enormous amount of time on the 2-5-1 was the jazz blues. And I said, hey, what is this? I like this. This is much more of an exciting sound than just stringing together the 2-5-1 chord progressions from one key to the next key to the next key. In the jazz blues, there was a more familiar structure that spoke to me. What was it about the jazz blues that related to me better than the 2-5-1? Well, it was simple. The main structure of the jazz blues is the blues, the moving between the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. Yes, there was a few 2-5-1s in there, but they happened quickly and they sounded more like they were like decoration. They weren't the meat and potatoes of the song. That 1-4-5 progression, they sounded so familiar to me. And there's a good reason why too. Those sounds were all over the rock songs that I've been playing for about 7 or 8 years. Having that core sound of the 1, the 4, and the 5 chords was it. Everything started to make sense to me. And the things that I had learned from my rock music and the things that I was learning from jazz music, all of a sudden, they weren't so far apart anymore. I needed to know more about this. Why did this jazz blues have the sound that spoke to me? As we learned more about it, it was explained to me that the jazz blues was just a 12-bar blues, but it had some more complex chord substitutions added in places. And when I learned how those substitutions were created, they were kind of like little key changes based around the 4 and the 5 chords. I got my answer. I needed to know a lot more about the 12-bar blues, where it came from. At that point, I knew that some songs that I loved were based around the 12-bar blues, but I really hadn't gone any further than that. The 12-bar blues was my Rosetta Stone. It was the thing that linked all of this music that I was learning together. The rock music had evolved from the blues. The jazz music had also evolved from the blues, just in a different way. I finally got it. A lot of the chord progressions that I already knew were just variations on the theme. They used this 12-bar blues, this chord progression, as a framework, a starting point from which to experiment on. So I got to work. I was learning everything I could about the blues. I started my way from the current players of the day, and at that time it was like Robert Cray, Eric Clapton, B.B. King, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and Jimmy Vaughan, and I studied them. And I learned what guitar players that they liked, that they emulated, and that was like Hubert Sumlin and Albert King, T-Bone Walker, Buddy Guy, and I just kept going back and back and back, learning everything I could. This knowledge of the blues not only put me on a path to being a blues guitarist, but it improved all of my guitar playing in styles that, on the surface seem very different than the blues. But if I had a good understanding of how the blues worked, I would have definitely progressed much faster early on. So today, let's find out a bit about the blues. How is it constructed? What kind of chords and chord progressions are common with it? What kind of melodies are common with the blues? And what kind of scales go well with the blues? How does this apply to other styles of music? And how do you use this to your advantage? I've heard that the blues that we know today, the 12-bar blues, came about as a standard way for early blues musicians from different areas to play together. In its earliest form, chord progressions were very similar, but the durations were all over the place. Somebody might play one chord for 5 bars or 8 bars or 7 bars, who knows? But the idea is that with a set structure of the 12 bars, it created a common framework to play off of. This is something that I've heard several times over the years, but honestly, I have no way to confirm this. I'm not a music historian, so there's no way for me to know if the blues evolved into the 12-bar structure or maybe it was intended to be that way from the start. But what I do know is I do know the structure of the 12-bar blues. And it does create a solid framework to base songs around. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the structure of the 12-bar blues. We've talked a lot about music theory in previous episodes. If you haven't listened to some of the theory episodes and seen the blog posts about creating chords and chord progressions, I urge you to check them out. A lot of listeners have contacted me and let me know how much this content has helped them. So take a look if you can. Here, we're just going to call the chords by their number. And this is where you take the major scale and you give each note in the major scale a number. When you build a chord off of each of those notes, we'll give that chord that same number. So in the key of C, the C would be the 1 chord. The F, which is the 4th note of scale, that would be the 4 chord. And then the G chord, a G is the 5th note of the scale. It's called the 5 chord. So the chords in the 12-bar blues are played in this order. You'll play the 1 chord for 4 measures. Then you play the 4 chord for 2 measures. And then back to the 1 chord for 2 measures. Then you have the 5 chord for 1, the 4 chord for 1, and then the 1 chord for the last 2 measures. This is the basic 12-bar blues. But even this basic form can be played in a lot of different ways. You could play all those chords as major triads. And that sounds more like an acoustic kind of country blues type sound. You can play them all as 7th chords, as dominant 7th chords. You can play just some of them as dominant 7th chords and other ones as triads. You can add a 4 chord to the 2nd measure of the 12-bar blues. You can also add a 5 chord right at the very end to signal the end of the pattern. A lot of times at the end of the blues, if you don't do that, it's kind of hard to figure out where it ends and where it starts over again when you're repeating it. You can also play a 12-bar blues as a minor blues using mostly, but not all, but mostly minor chords. The scales you play over the blues are mainly the pentatonic scales. Usually the minor pentatonic scale, but you can also use the major pentatonic scale like I showed a few episodes ago, and it works perfectly over this. These easy 5-note scales are perfect for getting the raw emotion that the blues calls for in your lead lines and your melodies. There are many different rhythmic figures as well that work with the blues, but the main one, we're talking rhythm now, is the shuffle. It's the one has the bouncing triplet feel. You can also play the blues over a straight beat. A lot of Albert Collins songs were over a straight beat, but you can even play it over a rumba. So it works over lots of different, lots of different rhythmic figures. Most likely, you've heard the 12-bar blues before. Classic songs like Pride and Joy by Stevie Ray Vaughan, Call Me the Breeze by Lynyrd Skynyrd, Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin, and Folsom Prison Blues by Johnny Cash. Those are all based on the 12-bar blues. There are so many other songs like these that are based in this format. Okay, so that's the basic framework. Not too difficult. Very easy and straightforward. So let's talk about some valuable reasons why you should spend some time getting familiar with the blues. Number 1, first, it's the best way to start practicing lead guitar. It's so easy. You find out what key you're going to play in. You find the pentatonic scale that works. Play the chords and start exploring the sounds over it. You don't even need to worry about what chords are being played. The pentatonic scale works over all of them. It frees your mind up from a lot of thinking. Just play the scale up and down, back and forth over the whole thing. It just works. Playing a blues background track and working on your pentatonic scales is a great first step for any rock, soul, blues, country, or folk player. Okay, number 2. Second, playing the blues is a great way to work on phrasing. Just trying to learn the melodies to famous blues songs can give you a great reference point for phrases and ideas for licks. Blues melodies are very simple, and they usually have very strong rhythmic ideas. And most of the time, they come directly from the pentatonic scale. In fact, they usually only use a few notes from the scale in a very limited range. You could turn on the song Key to the Highway or The Thrill Is Gone and try to learn what the vocals are, the vocal melody, with your guitar. It won't take you very long, and the ideas that you will get from spending the time learning these things are really worth it. Okay, number 3, the blues will grow with you. When you're ready to move forward, you can switch your thinking from just playing one scale over all the chords to changing your scale to match each chord. You can also start targeting the strong notes of each chord to really have that inside sound, to really sound like you have command over the chords. Targeting the 3rd and the 7th of each chord is a great way to break out of that minor pentatonic sound. The minor pentatonic, which, while it's very, very cool, it sometimes can sound like it's starting to wander a bit because it doesn't have that very strong major 3rd note in it. It may not sound like it perfectly matches the chords sometimes. You can also play your major pentatonic, let's see, in the key of A, an A major pentatonic over the A7. Then you could switch to the D major pentatonic over the D7. And then when it goes to the E, you could play your E major pentatonic. You can also move past the pentatonic scales completely when you're ready to start using the Mixolydian mode over each chord, which is just it's a fancy major scale with a flat 7th, so it matches the dominant 7th chords really well. Okay, let's go to 4. 4th, it's a great way to dip your toes into using tension and release, namely the diminished scale. When you use the 12-bar blues pattern with all 7th chords, it becomes very easy to practice playing outside a little bit. The half-whole diminished scale works perfectly over 7th chords. The diminished scale is a symmetrical scale, meaning the intervals that make up the scale have a pattern, a regular pattern. In this version of the diminished, the scale is made up of a half step and then a whole step, repeated over and over and over. And you start that at the root of the 7th chords. It's a great first step to practicing adding tension and then release by going back to the pentatonic or Mixolydian mode. 5th, having a good command over the 12-bar blues is a great stepping stone to other styles of music that were influenced by the blues. Jazz blues, and to a small extent modal jazz, they have several things in common with the blues, and some licks translate very well between the styles. Take a listen to Kenny Burrell for a jazz guitar player that plays in a very bluesy style, but he's still in the jazz family. If you listen to Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash, you're bound to hear some blues influence in a lot of their songs. I know Nightlife and Folsom Prison Blues, those are 12-bar blues songs. So you can play all of your blues licks over both of these songs, and it would sound great. Okay, so at this point, you probably can see that I'm really pushing the blues thing. Why? Because it's so helpful. Even if you aren't into the blues at all, it's like learning how to put together basic sentences when you're learning how to write. It's a fundamental part of the music we listen to, and becoming proficient and eventually getting my own style when I was playing the blues, it has really moved me forward as a guitarist. So that's all well and good, but how do I start? How do I get started with this? Okay. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the 12-bar blues to our daily practice routine. Once you practice your technique, your chords, your scales, your songs, your repertoire, spend several minutes playing the blues. If you're not quite far along on the guitar yet, work on the chords. Work on the 7th chords. But once you get those chords down, try working on the shuffle patterns, kind of like the rhythm for A Pride and Joy from Stevie Ray Vaughan, and play them at many different tempos and along to a background track. It's so easy to type in blues background track in the key of whatever you're working on that day. So just strum away. But if you're farther along and you're playing lead, start improvising in the key of that day for you. And usually that's how I do it. One day I'll just kind of practice everything in A. Maybe the next day I practice in G. I change the key for each day. But use your major and minor pentatonics. And try some Mixolydian mode. After that, when you're okay with those other ones, and then start working on some outside sounds, like we talked about the diminished scale. Playing the blues is always good practice, and it always relates to other songs and styles of music. You won't just be working on the blues at hand, but you'll be getting practice in other songs as well, and styles as well. Also, take some time to listen to some different blues players. Get some ideas from the greats. You may hear some sounds in their playing that you might not be getting in your playing. I know that Stevie Ray Vaughan used notes outside of the pentatonics all the time, especially that little chromatic walk down from the 9th degree to the tonic, like D, C sharp, and then C in the key of C, right down to this key of C. But if you can, another thing you can do is go out and see a local blues player and really watch what he or she is doing. Or if you can't do that, find a recorded live performance of your favorite blues guitarist on YouTube and study it. Because of the way the pentatonic scale is laid out, it's pretty easy to pick out what a blues guitarist is playing. I can spot pattern 1 of the minor pentatonic scale across a room. I can spot it a mile away. So try to get some new ideas from what you see. And last but not least, try to sit in at an open mic night in your area. This is a great one, and the blues is perfect for this. The experience of playing in front of a live audience is very important to your growth as a musician. And guaranteed, the band that's hosting the open mic night, they're going to know a lot of blues. It's a perfect vehicle to jam with other musicians, and you may not have ever even played with those guys before. So no matter if you just play rhythm or if you want to practice your lead playing, an open mic night is a great way to get you out there using a very common musical language, the blues. You can also try to find some friends that might like to get together and play some. You don't have to play blues all the time, but make sure you throw a few blues songs in there. The communication you get between players when you're playing the blues is very fun. I guess it's because it's not super complicated. Guitar players tend to pay more attention to their surroundings if they're playing the blues than if they were playing something really difficult. It's also much easier to really listen to what the other musicians are doing when you're playing the blues. If you're just playing the rhythm, after a while, the chords are so easy, you can get away with not paying so much attention to what you're doing, and you're able to listen a lot more to what the other players are doing. You might be thinking, of course, people are listening to the other players when they're playing music. But let me tell you something. You have no idea how many players get so engrossed in what they're trying to play that they're barely paying any attention to the rest of the band. And that's where big mistakes can be made, or even at a minimum, that can keep a band from reaching its full potential. Being able to really pay attention to others while you play your own part is a very important skill to develop. Okay, so that's why playing the blues can really help your guitar playing. We went through how the blues is structured, what scales work over those chords. We went through the 5 reasons why you should be familiar with the blues, and we ended with several ways to incorporate the blues in your practicing and your playing. I feel that even if you just incorporate the blues into some of your playing, just a little bit, you'll be doing yourself a favor. It can always be helpful to be familiar with something that has been the foundation of the music that we've been listening to for over the last 100 years. So let me know what you think. Have you spent time learning and playing the blues? Do you feel that it's helped you? Not just to play the blues better, but in other styles of music as well. I'd love to know this. So please let us know. We want to hear from you. So just leave a comment on the show notes page, and you can find the show notes page over at www.playguitarpodcast.com/020. This is listener feedback. This is where if you have a comment or a question that I can help you with, I'll try my best to help you. To get in touch, you can always email me at feedback@playguitarpodcast.com, or you can use the show notes, you comment on the show notes page, or you can use the contact form of the site. But my favorite way is for you to leave a question for the show by my SpeakPipe voicemail. When you go to my main page on playguitarpodcast.com, it's over on the right of the screen. Click the button and you can record a short message for me to use on the show. And you can also get to this voicemail on my contact page. Awesome week for the feedback. A lot of feedback this week. It's wonderful. So I'll just start. I'll just go right into it. Sean, I got an email from Sean, and he loves the podcast, and he's been going through the whole thing, and he said a whole lot of nice stuff, and it just floors me how many really nice emails I've been getting so far. So thank you so much, Sean. I sure appreciate your email, and I'll be if I haven't got back to you already, I'll be getting back to you real soon. Also, I got an email from Peter, and he wants to know more about the podcast and different ways he can get it. And so thank you, Peter, for writing in. I got some iTunes stuff this week too. Jay Wood said it was awesome and it's helped him a whole lot. Wonderful. Thank you so much for the review from Jay Woods. And also, this is my favorite, McCadillacan. Awesome. And he said some really, really cool stuff about it. And I'm just scanning through it here now. But at the end, he said he'd be devastated if it ever stops. I'm not planning on stopping. I promise I'm not planning on stopping. It's going good. Okay, so this week also had a lot of fun. I got to spend some time with Jason and Chris, and you probably all know Jason and Chris because they've been frequent feedbackers and commenters. So I had a lot of fun getting to talk to them this week, and we talked a lot about guitar and some things that would be cool to do for the show, and they had some really great ideas and good friends. Both Jason and Chris, I consider them good friends. So that was so much fun for me. I got a few other comments here. Let's see here. Nope, that was it. I've already gone through that one. So, okay, so we're getting close to the end. Please don't forget, go over to www.freeblueslesson.com to get access to that free video lesson I've got. It's on the 6 steps I found that will give you the foundations for playing killer blues solos. And it's a gift for you that I'm starting today on the 20th episode. Okay, so that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining me today for the Play Guitar Podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show on iTunes or in your favorite podcast player. Also, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave an iTunes review for the show. If you're interested in online lessons, go on over to playguitaracademy.com and join my early adopter list to get news on the opening of the site and an early adopter discount when that gets ready. Also, follow me on all of my different social media pages. Links to them are at playguitarpodcast.com. Thank you again, and I'll see you on the next episode.